Hi there. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about some of the concepts in the very first chapters of statistics, where we're talking about just these vocabulary terms, populations and samples and variables and data and things like that. And so what I want us to do is I want us to imagine a scenario where we're working in a soda factory. And we heard some reports that maybe our soda cans aren't being filled to the level that we advertise. We advertise that a soda can holds 12 ounces of soda, and people are reporting that maybe it's a little bit less. All right, and we're concerned about that. So we want to test this. So imagine if you ran that factory, what you might do to test it. All right, so one thing we might do is we might go and check the levels in some of the cans, right? So let's go talk about how the statistics, the terminology that we've been talking about pertains to this particular example. So there we are. We want to know the average amount of soda in our cans, right? So what we're going to do is we'll measure the amount of soda in each can. So what we're doing here is we are using a variable. A variable is a description of something that we've decided to measure. Okay, it's a measurement that we've decided to do. All right, that's what a variable is. So in this case, the variable is how much soda is in each can. When we get an answer for that variable, the answer is called a datum. That's the amount of soda in the can. So the variable is more like the question. It's a description of what we're going to measure, and the datum is the actual value that measurement takes on. Now, you may not have heard the word datum. We usually don't use that word. Instead, we refer to data. Data is the plural of datum, and that is what we usually are talking about, because usually we don't just measure one thing. We make this measurement a whole bunch of times, right? Because we don't, just measuring one can of soda isn't really good enough, right? I might just luck out and pick a can that was filled to the right level, but it could be that 90% of them aren't filled to the right level. So usually we want to make a whole bunch of these measurements, right? And so we're going to get a whole collection of data. So we have one variable, but we can record a lot of different values from that variable, right? Because we can record that variable on a lot of different cans, right? And so that gives us a set of data. Okay, well, what should we think about next? Well, like I said, one can is not good enough, right? We want an idea of the average amount of soda that's in all of our cans, okay? So that is, if we look at all of the cans, that's the population that we're dealing with. And that's really what we want to know about. We want to know about the soda in all of our cans. And that's what we call the population. And what we want to know about the population is the average amount in those cans. And that's called a parameter. Okay, so notice how this is distinguished from a variable. The variable is a measurement that we make on a specific can. The data is the values that we collect. The parameter is a summary of those values. We're going to take all those values, the individual measurements from each can, and we're going to, you could do lots of things, but in this case we're taking an average of them. And when I summarize all those data values into one value from the population, that's called a parameter. So the parameter is the average of all the data values. Now, there's a problem with this though, right? We can't realistically go and measure every single can. That's ridiculous. I mean, what, are we supposed to open every single can? I mean, then we won't have any left to sell, right? We can't do that. That's ridiculous. So what do we do instead? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a sample. And a sample is just taking a selection from the population. So we have the population in mind, what we'd really like to know about, but instead what we're going to do is we're going to take a group of cans from the population, and that is called our sample. Let me get out of the way here. That's called our sample, okay? And we can make the same measurement in our sample, gliding around, make the same measurement from our sample that we tried to do with the population, right? We record the values, the amount of soda in each can, and then we'll take an average, right? And that gives us what we call a statistic. That's the average amount of in our cans from the sample. So notice the difference here. The parameter is a summary of the data from the population, but we can't actually get the parameter. It's a hypothetical idea. That's the thing we want to know about, but it's something we can't actually get. So instead, we take a sample and we do the same thing to the sample. And that thing called the statistic, the summary of that data, is something we can actually compute because it is realistic to get a sample. Okay, so I'm always in the way, aren't I? In summary, what have we talked about? A variable describes what we are measuring. Okay? Variable describes what we are measuring, whether it be an amount. In this case, it's the amount of soda. You could also measure the weight of something, which may have been a better way to do this particular one if you wanted to be realistic about it. Might measure someone's age, any kind of thing that you've decided to measure. That's the variable. What is the data? The data is just the collection of all those measurements. So you go ahead and make those measurements and write them down. And that list is the data. All right? So the data are the values that you get by applying the variable to individuals, right, from either the population or the sample. The population is the group that we really want to know about. Right? That's the group that we really are interested in finding out something about. And if we were actually able to apply the variable to every single person in the population, we would get a parameter, right? So a parameter is a hypothetical thing because we can never actually get this. There's usually too many people in the population, or it's just too impractical to measure the variable on every single person, that it's just not really feasible to obtain, but it's something we can have in mind. That's really what we want to know. We want to know what the parameter is. And so what we do instead is we take a sample. That's a subset of the population, and that's what we'll use instead. So we'll do the same thing that we were going to do for the parameter, to find the parameter, but we're going to do it to the sample. So we'll record the values of our variable on the sample to get data, sample data. We'll summarize that data, perhaps taking an average or a percentage or something like this, and that'll give us a statistic. And if our sample's a good one, if it's representative of the population, then that statistic should be a good approximation of the parameter. So we could say that our parameter is probably the value that we're getting right here. Okay, so I just wanted to go through this with you just to summarize these concepts and put them into a concrete example. So I hope that helped. I will see you in the next video.